our interview to take our viewers to Washington, D.C. because Donald Trump, the former US president, is about to touch down in the city. Donald Trump will be appearing before a federal magistrate where he will be formally charged on 4 counts, including conspiracy to defraud the United States, conspiracy to obstruct an official proceeding, obstruction of and attempted obstruction of official proceedings, and conspiracy against rights. This is a hugely historic moment for the United States, the 3rd criminal indictment against Trump, and of course the most grave relating to when he was serving as president, accused of overturning the 2020 election results that inspired the later events around the Capitol building, the insurrection on January the 6th, 2021. If you've just joined us, you are looking at Donald Trump's plane as it has touched down. It's made the short 45-minute journey from Bedminster, New Jersey, where Trump has a resort. We expect him to get off the plane and make the short drive towards the federal magistrates. And we expect the hearing to be pretty short as well. It's an opportunity for him to hear the charges against him and to potentially make a plea. Whether or not he will speak or whether he'll speak through his lawyer, all of those questions will be answered soon. But what the prosecutors hope is that this will pave the way for a trial at some point, which would be an opportunity for an array of witnesses to appear, potentially also his former vice president, Mike Pence. This is also very much a stress test of the American judicial system in a country where Trump has continued to insist that the elections of 2020 were stolen. And just to add, according to latest figures, at least 3 in 10 Americans also believe that to be the case as well. The indictment's the product of months of investigations in which the special counsel, Jack Smith, who is a career prosecutor, looked into the January 6th insurrection at the US Capitol. And during the process of compiling the indictment, Smith's team questioned several high-profile members of Trump's inner circle, including his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, a former White House communications director, Hope Hicks. You are looking at live pictures of Donald Trump's aircraft. You can see the Trump name, of course, emblazoned on the side of the plane as it taxis across the runway there. A short journey will be then made to the federal magistrates, where he'll be formally charged on 4 counts. Just to repeat what those 4 counts are: conspiracy to defraud the United States, conspiracy to obstruct an official proceeding, obstruction of, an attempt to obstruct an official proceeding, and conspiracy against rights. We'll obviously be following this to its conclusion over the course of the day. OK, it's time for sport now, and the latest from the Women's World Cup. Here's Rahul.
Niamh, thank you very much. We've seen more history at the Women's World Cup today. Debutants Morocco have become the first Arab or North African side to reach the knockout stages. They've qualified for the last 16 at the expense of 2-time winners Germany, who are out. Well, all 4 teams in Group H still had a chance to go through at the start of play. Morocco were up against Colombia in Perth and needed to better the results of Germany, who were playing South Korea in Brisbane. The Germans playing a South Korean team, remember, that had yet to record a single point at this World Cup. Well, despite their awful form heading into the match, it was the South Koreans who got the very first goal of the day. Cho So-hyun putting them ahead against Germany in just the 6th minute. The pressure was now on the Germans, who were heading out at that stage, but they did manage to equalise just before half-time. Their inspirational captain, Alexandra Popp, scoring her 4th goal in 3 games to make it 1-1, and who are back on track to go through. But then it swung back in Morocco's favour when they were awarded a penalty after a Colombia foul in the box. The initial shot was saved, but Anissa Lamari reacted fastest to score off the rebound. Morocco were 1-0 up, and once again, they were heading into the last 16 as things stood. Well, back in Brisbane, Popp nearly rescued Germany again. The German captain got the ball over the line, but was ruled out by VAR for offside. Then she headed against the crossbar. They kept pushing, but it was still all square, and Germany was still heading out of the World Cup. And in Perth, Morocco's game finished with them winning 1-0, but they faced an anxious wait watching the Germany game on their phones. And the celebration started as soon as news came through that the Germans had failed to get the winner. The two-time World Cup winners and second-ranked team in the world knocked out at the group stage for the very first time in their history. As for Morocco, who were beaten 6-0 by Germany in their opening game, well, they become only the 8th debutant team to reach the last 16. So here's how the last 16 games shape up. Switzerland up against Spain, and Japan versus Norway kicks things off on Saturday. And on Sunday, it's the Netherlands against South Africa, and then defending champions USA take on Sweden. Into Monday, European champions England face Nigeria, and co-host Australia are up against Denmark. There it is. And then on Tuesday, it's Colombia against Jamaica, and France up against Morocco, the country that knocked them out of the Men's World Cup last year in Qatar. Now, newly crowned Formula E world champion Jake Dennis says he's open to competing to Formula One in the future. The Avalanche Andretti driver became the first ever British Formula E world champion this past weekend in London, which was staging the season finale. Dennis, who's been a test driver for F1 team Red Bull, has been speaking to Al Jazeera's Sahel Malik about his triumph and his future.
It's obviously a really incredible achievement of obviously what we've left London with. There's the emotions I felt on Sunday and Saturday really was pretty special to obviously share it with my team. All the hard work, everything what went into the whole season was just something I'll never forget. You know, it still gives me goosebumps now thinking about it.
Now, Jake, you join a list of elite British world champion drivers, like Lewis Hamilton, Colin McRae, Nigel Mansell. Who are the drivers that have inspired you on your road to becoming a world champion?
When I was younger, I actually never really had too many inspirational people to look up to. I always tried to be my own person. So I actually didn't really ever inspire to be, the next Lewis Hamilton or Nigel Mansell or anything like this. But I think as I got older, I started to learn a little bit more about, I think, James Hunt. I think he was a really cool racing driver. He enjoyed life. He didn't take racing too seriously. I would say if I had to choose anyone, it would be more along his lines. But nevertheless, I always try to choose my own journey and not really, try to copy anyone else.
Now, Andretti Autosport have been pushing to be part of Formula One. If that happens, is joining their Formula One team something that would appeal to you?
I mean, it's definitely an interesting topic, for sure. I think, if the opportunity came about, it would be definitely something to consider, but nevertheless, I don't think it's always the best thing to do to go into Formula One. You've seen the likes of Nick de Vries, who didn't have the best of cars, and then it's then very easy to be forgotten about, and you're only as good as your last race in motorsports. But I am obviously very interested in Formula One. It's something which I've always been involved in, something which from such a young age I think everyone's involved in, and it would appeal to me. But I wouldn't make any rush decision to jump directly into it.
Now, the LA Lakers jersey worn by Wilt Chamberlain in the 1972 NBA Finals is to be auctioned. The Hall of Fame player wore it when he scored 24 points and 29 rebounds against the New York Knicks, despite having a broken hand, to lead the Lakers to their first ever NBA title. Bidding starts later this month, and the jersey is expected to fetch more than $4 million. And finally, Somalia's sports minister has apologised after an untrained sprinter was sent out to represent the country at the World University Games in China. Well, footage of the runner in lane 3 has gone viral and caused deep embarrassment to the country. She finished 10 seconds behind the winner of the 100 metres. It's alleged that she only competed because she's a relative of the chairwoman of Somalia's Athletics Federation. The Sports Ministry has called for the chairwoman to be suspended. And that is all your sport for now. I'll have more later. Neve.
All right, many thanks for that, Rahul. OK, you are watching Al Jazeera live from Doha. We can take you to some live pictures in Washington, D.C., where we are waiting for Donald J. Trump to make his way down the steps of his aircraft. He's made the short journey, only 45 minutes or so, from his resort in Bedminster, New Jersey. And he will be appearing before a federal magistrate. He is being charged, or going to be charged, rather, on 4 counts accused of overturning the 2020 election results. This airport, of course, Arlington, Virginia. He'll then, of course, make the short journey to the court. The hearing is meant to be very short indeed, a chance for him to hear the charges read out. There is very likely to be a plea then, whether that is through his lawyer or whether he will have a chance to speak. All of these questions will be answered soon. But answering, hopefully, some of the most pressing questions, Alan Fisher, who joins us from outside the federal courthouse. And Alan, as I said there, we're waiting for Donald Trump to emerge on the top of the stairs, leaving his aircraft, the airport there in Arlington, Virginia. Talk us through the choreography of this brief court appearance and its significance in US political history.
Well, he'll get into his motorcade. It will drive the 5 kilometres from. So we've had a number of people who have been protesting. There's a gentleman here which you can't quite see, but he's wearing a striped suit in the form of a 1930s movie convict. This is a gentleman who was there in Miami. He actually ran in front of Donald Trump's motorcade as it left, and he was taken to the ground by Secret Service, and he later appeared in court as well. Donald Trump has a 5-kilometre drive from Ronald Reagan National Airport to here at the courthouse. Now, normally at this time of day in Washington, that could take you quite a while, but it helps if you're a former president who's on his way to court, because there will be a motorcade that will escort him all the way, clearing the path. So it should take no more than 10-15 minutes to get here. He'll be taken into an underground entrance in one of the corners of the courthouse. He will then be taken to be processed. He will give his name. He will hand over his social security number and his occupation, presidential candidate, former president of the United States of America. He will be fingerprinted. There will be no perp picture, perp walk for him. No cameras in federal court here in the United States. He will then go into the court with his lawyers. The 4 charges, 3 of conspiracy, 1 of obstruction, will be read out. He'll be asked if he understands the charges and then asked if he wants to plead. Almost certainly will plead not guilty to the charge. Now, we also know that Donald Trump could have done this over Zoom, but opted not to. He wanted to come to Washington, D.C. He enjoys the show. He thinks this puts pressure on the authorities. He thinks supporters will come out, although there's a lot fewer of them here in Washington, D.C. And of course, we know that he declared his candidacy for the presidency back in November last year, incredibly early in the election cycle. And many people speculated at the time the reason he was doing it so early was because he knew these legal troubles were coming down the pipe, and then he could claim that this was a political prosecution. And so he knew what he was doing when he declared for president. But this will be his 3rd indictment since he left office in January 2021, and he will be here in court in under an hour.
Right, and Alan, we've just seen the man himself make the short journey down from the this Trump aircraft into a very large car, which, as you said, is heading in your direction on a very short drive. Of course, an event like this, given the amount of time that the police there in Washington, D.C. have been given to plan for this situation, it must be a huge headache for the authorities. The city must be on edge around this one.
Well, actually, there's a fairly relaxed atmosphere here. That's because, with the exception of January the 6th, in 2021, Washington, D.C. knows how to prepare for big events like this. And if they get a bit of notice, then they can lock things down, they can put security plans in place. And clearly, Jack Smith and his office was talking to the sheriffs who guard the courthouse, to the Secret Service, to the local police, to make sure that this goes as smoothly as possible. And certainly the protesters, who are largely on the other side of the courthouse, have been good-natured as they were largely in Miami. You'll remember in Miami, the mayor there told us that we're preparing for a crowd of anything between 5,000 and 50,000. In the end, there was probably about 1,000 people who turned up, most of them Trump supporters, a few voices of dissent. Here, that ratio is probably flipped. There are a few Trump supporters, but there are a lot more people who want to see Donald Trump in court, because, of course, many people believe that the worst thing that Donald Trump did during his entire presidency was incite a crowd for January the 6th. Now, he's not not being charged with incitement, but the charges that he faces here all relate to what happened on January the 6th and the attempt to overturn the will of the American people in the 2020 presidential election to stop the peaceful transition of power, which of course had been a staple since the start of the Republic in the 1700s.
And Alan, of course, obviously no defence has been launched yet. We only have the indictment. But Trump's team not happy this is all happening in Washington.
That's right. There will be legal arguments that will be made at some point in the future. We may even hear a few of them in the courthouse today. But there is a suggestion from the Trump team that they will put forward the idea that West Virginia would be a better location for Donald Trump. Certainly, it's a more conservative state, but that's likely to be thrown out by the judge in the case here, simply not going to fly. There will be other legal moves that Trump's legal team have hinted that they will issue subpoenas to people that they believe were involved in what happened in January the 6th, maybe going as far as subpoenaing Joe Biden himself. Now, they've got to go in front of a judge and argue why those are relevant, so a lot of these will be thrown out. But that will delay things. And of course, many people believe that that's the whole point of Donald Trump's defense, that he wants to delay and delay and delay, not just the case in New York, but also the case in Miami and the case here in Washington, because if he delays it enough, if you look at the polls, he may have been indicted 3 times, impeached twice, but he is still ahead in the Republican nomination battle to win their presidential nomination. And he believes that if he wins the election, that he can appoint an Attorney General and run a Department of Justice that makes all of this disappear. And so it is all about delay, delay, delay. But we know that Jack Smith kept the indictment very clean, very short, indicted only one person, even though there are 6 unnamed co-conspirators, although we know the names of about 5 of them, so that this could go to a jury very quickly and would be presented in a very simple fashion so that people could understand what was being accused, what they believe Donald Trump did. And of course, Jack Smith will be, as the special prosecutor, looking for a guilty verdict on Donald Trump. And there are many people in Washington, D.C. who hope that happen before the presidential election that is coming up.
Alan, many thanks for that. We'll be back with you shortly, but let's cross now to Shihab Rattanzi, who's also near the court there in Washington, D.C. And Shihab, obviously, given all the controversy surrounding Donald Trump, what is the atmosphere like there? Are there supporters of Trump? Are there those opposed to him? What's the mood like?
Well, I think with a view to actually getting to talk to one of the supporters of Donald Trump. There are very few protesters here generally, though. Probably about half a dozen basically. And so each protester is swarmed by the media as soon as they're found. But we have John Johnson here, travelled from the Jersey Shore. Why are you here today?
Just to support an American hero president. He's an America First president. He's a constitutional supporter. And he's the best thing that's ever happened in the American political system.
What do you think of the indictments, though?
That's just another sham. The only thing I'm looking forward to is the Trump bump he's going to get in the polls. Thank you, Jack Smith. Just like we had in Miami, just like we had in New York a couple months ago. I'll probably go up another 4 or 5, maybe 6 points in the polls after today.
But isn't trying to get a set of, quote, fake electors, isn't that against the Constitution?
It's the same thing Al Gore did in 2000, same thing John Kerry did in 2004, same thing the Clinton crime family did in 2016. You gotta remember, in this country, the most fair, accurate, legit election this country has ever had was 2016. The Democrats were caught off guard. They thought they didn't have to cheat as bad as they usually do, so they let it ride, and they underestimated the heartbeat of America. The heartbeat of America is wherever Trump got a vote in this country. It's the most accurate, legit election ever done. The Democrats had to come up with this crossfire hurricane made-up novel story.
That was Russiagate.
Russiagate. Russia. What happened in the John Durham report? You're a journalist. What happened? It was all debunked. Was it all debunked? Was 90% of it debunked, or was 100% of it debunked? I'll answer for it. 100% of it was debunked. The deep state and the Clinton crime family, they concocted this whole Russian collusion nonsense, and it got smashed back in their face.
John, thank you very much. I know you want to go. I think Donald Trump is approaching, so I know you want to get your place, but thank you very much for talking to us.
Yeah, we're looking forward to him coming back through. Trump is the only guy that can save America.
Thank you, John.
MAGA.
So, yeah, I mean, there are very few protesters here, as I said, but obviously this, we were tipped off by this enormous Trump flag over here. Then there are also others here as well. I mean, there's a chap over here, clearly with a Donald Trump with a Hitler moustache, lock the traitor up there. you can see, but really like 12, maybe slightly more protesters here. And you've got to remember, though, I mean, the latest polls show a majority of Republicans, 60-70%, do think that the election was stolen by Joe Biden. So, you may think, oh, well, gosh, this chap, he sounds like he's on the fringe. He's not, actually. That is actually Republican Party thinking right now. Neve?
All right, Shihab, many thanks for that. Let's cross back to Alan Fisher, who's at the federal courthouse. And Alan, some interesting points made by Shihab's guest there. Given that 3 in 10 Americans believe that the 2020 election was stolen, I mean, the legal system in its entirety is really going to be put under an awful lot of strain to show that it can stand fast throughout all of this.
Well, of course, when Donald Trump was impeached for what happened in January the 6th, many Republicans, particularly in the Senate, said we're not going to vote to impeach him, to ban him from office for the future, because there are other legal measures available. And Donald Trump had left office by the time the hearings came around. And then, of course, when they bring up these now separate legal proceedings, they say this is outrageous that Donald Trump should face this sort of legal action. Joining me now is Melanie Sloan, a former federal prosecutor. Melanie, this is going to be a tough case to prove, isn't it, for Jack Smith? Because although he's laid it out pretty clearly in a 45-page indictment, he's still got to convince beyond a reasonable doubt to 12 members of a jury that this is what Donald Trump was thinking when he did what he did.
Yes, absolutely. It's all going to come down to Donald Trump's intent. The indictment goes through in chapter and verse all of the conversations that Donald Trump was having with legislators around the country, trying to convince them not to certify the election. It also mentions a bunch of unindicted co-conspirators and all of their efforts to help Trump stay in power. But in the end, what it's going to come down to is that Jack Smith is going to have to prove that Donald Trump knew that he had lost the election and was deliberately trying to overturn the results of the election in any event.
Now, one of his defenses is that, well, my lawyers told me I could do this. Now, you used to be a lawyer. If you told me to do something, I would probably do it because I would trust you. Is that a good defense?
That is not a good defense. That does not work in general in criminal justice law, that my lawyers told me to do it. And besides that, that is also why all of his lawyers are unindicted co-conspirators, because all of those lawyers also seem to have known this was not true. I mean, there are places in the indictment where Giuliani says, well, we'll find the votes later. So they knew that it wasn't true, and they knew that they were telling Trump just what he wanted to hear. And at the same time, Trump was also hearing from many, many senior advisors that he had lost the election. We've already heard that even his own daughter, Ivanka Trump, talked in front of the January 6th committee about the fact that she'd had a conversation telling her dad that he'd lost the election. But many, many top officials whom Mr. Trump personally appointed, like former Attorney General William Barr, told him that he'd lost the election. So it's going to be very hard for him to say he didn't know he lost the election when he had so many people telling him he lost the election.
Now, one of the defences is going to be, well, I was fully entitled to say this. The First Amendment allows me to say that I can't say that is an infringement of that. To me, that sounds like a defence that you're going to use on appeal rather than something that you use in the courtroom here. Would that be fair?
I certainly think that this case will be going up on appeal. There's really no question that were Trump to be convicted, this would be a case that was immediately appealed, and ultimately the Supreme Court will have to weigh in on this. So there will be those First Amendment arguments, but I think that Donald Trump will argue that right at trial. He'll say, hey, I was just talking and I have my right to free speech, and there may be some jurors who are persuaded by that, but that's why Jack Smith will be making a very careful case day in and day out about the fact that Trump knew he lost the election and that he talked to people about having lost the election and that he tried to stay in power despite losing the election.
Let me ask you something that a lot of people who don't live in America have asked me. If Donald Trump is convicted, that's not disqualifying. He can still run for president. What is America thinking by allowing that to happen?
We just haven't been in this position before, so it was very hard to imagine. Trump has been norm-breaking from the beginning. The only way you cannot be allowed to serve is if you are impeached, and so that was a big mistake by the Senate Republicans last time after the election, after January 6th, where they decided not to convict him in the second impeachment trial. And I think they did that because Senator Mitch McConnell thought he'd just go away and this would be better for America. But of course, anybody who watches Donald Trump knows he never just goes away. And, you know, another thing that I think is important for people to recognize, that if this matter isn't settled and Mr. Trump actually is elected as president, there is an opinion by the Office of Legal Counsel, the part of the Department of Justice that's called the Justice Department's brain, that has said that Trump, if he's indicted and the case hasn't gone to trial, the case will have to go away. You cannot be indicted and tried while you are a sitting president. So it's possible they could toll the case, meaning delay it till after he's out of the presidency, but that's not very likely. In large part, it's much more likely that all of this just disappears, which may be part of why Trump is still running for president. If he runs for president, all of his criminal entanglements, if he were to win, they all drop away, and otherwise he could be convicted and face jail time.
Melanie, thanks very much indeed for joining us live here. The views of a former federal prosecutor. Donald Trump should be making his way into the courtroom very shortly. It's a short drive from Reagan National Airport here to the centre of Washington, D.C. He will then be processed. Fingerprints will taken. He'll have to give his name and his social security number and then enter the courtroom where the charges on this latest indictment will be read to him, and he will be asked to enter a plea, which we fully expect to be not guilty.
All right, Alan, many thanks for that, and thanks also to Melanie Sloan. Let's cross over to Heidi Jo Castro, who's standing by because we believe Donald Trump is inching ever closer to the courthouse. Heidi, none of this needed to actually happen in person, did it?
He's in one of these vehicles.
Sorry, go ahead, Heidi.
No, but you know, it's no surprise that he is appearing in person, and we're expecting him to be in one of these vehicles that's passing behind me. This is sort of the backside of the courthouse where we were just talking to Alan, and these police cars are part of the motorcade that are escorting the former president from the nearby airport. They're expected to make this round this corner, and then most likely they will go into an underground garage. So you may not see Trump himself at all. You may see him drive by as we're speaking here, but you can see the level of security. It really ramped up in the last hour or two as his arrival was imminent. I'm actually squeezed between two dump trucks. These are parked here, and there's about a dozen of them blocking access on this block, and just in this little window between two parked dump trucks, they have two police officers with Washington, D.C. Metropolitan Police Force guarding this gap. They have Secret Service further back. Every single second and every single step of this choreographed arrival of the former president planned down to the last instant. And of course, here are more of those trucks, and you're seeing the press also waiting for his arrival. We'll go back to him. We'll go back to his arrival if we see him, but I wanted to actually bring in a resident from D.C. among the dozens or so who are here. Annika, so glad that you can join me. Why is being here to see the former president face these charges, why is that important to you?
I think the fact that we're willing to hold our elected leaders accountable is something that's really important to me. I think that so many Americans were raised on the idea of democracy, and I think that's an idea that we're straying away from, honestly. So I think that it's really important to really stand here and stand by the justice system.
Annika, there's so much controversy regarding this indictment. We've heard from some pro-Trump supporters who are here, but why do you want to see this prosecution happen?
I want to see this prosecution happen because, honestly, I think that Trump is a threat to our democracy, and I think he's a threat to a lot of democracies around the world. And I think that proving that he is guilty is something that's going to be really important for our global politics.
All right, thank you so much, Annika. And again, we are still waiting for the ex-president himself to be arriving along the motorcade. Rob, I actually just dropped my call with you. I cannot hear you if you're speaking to me. So I will back up in case we see the ex-president pass by in the moments to come.
OK, Heidi, many thanks for that. So as Heidi was saying, Donald Trump has now arrived at the courthouse. He's been driven into an underground garage. We believe that the entire procedure will take place in a lower floor room. Unclear as yet whether we will ever actually see any images from that proceeding. It is, of course, the opportunity, the chance for Trump to hear the charges being read out. And we expect the former president to also plea guilty or not guilty. Back to Alan Fisher now, who's outside that Washington, D.C. federal courthouse. And, of course, Alan, all of this is taking place only a few blocks away from, I guess, I suppose, is the scene of the crime.
That's right, Capitol Hill, not that far away from where I'm standing, within a quick 15-minute walk and you'd be there. And actually, I've heard a few people in the crowd saying that they were here on January the 6th. There was actually someone saying that they came along intending to be part of a peaceful protest but got caught up in what had happened, and they were pointing the finger very much at Donald Trump. And that, of course, is what Jack Smith is doing, saying that he's not gone as far as charging him with inciting the crowd, but he's suggesting that what happened on January the 6th, and we saw that in his comments on Tuesday evening when he paid tribute to those who defended the Capitol, that they did that because of the atmosphere that Donald Trump had created. So it's perhaps a tactical decision on Jack Smith, the special prosecutor's part, not to charge him with incitement or insurrection, because that would have made this a much more difficult case to prove. Joining me now here is John Ferry, who's a Republican strategist. John, incredibly, having been indicted 3 times, impeached twice, Donald Trump's still leading the Republican race. Why are the Republicans so in love with this guy who, if you look at the real figures, didn't do a brilliant job when he was in the White House?
Well, if you look at the economy, he did pretty well. And if you look at kind of looking out for the interests of his voters, he did very well. And they had a special bond with him. And they look at all of these prosecutions as persecution. They think that it's the Washington establishment who is going after Donald Trump because he represented their interests. And the other thing this has done, this has really made it very, very difficult for any other candidate to run against Donald Trump, because he's taking all of the air out of the balloon. You know, no one's talking about Ron DeSantis, no one's talking about Tim Scott, no one's talking about Mike Pence, only to talk in the context of where they are on Donald Trump. And so Trump is dominating the discussions in each one of these prosecutions where he's saying, this is a persecution of me. I'm trying to look out for your interests, and they're tearing me down. This has helped him with Republican voters.
And it must be hard if you're running against Donald Trump in the Republican primary, that a lot of your message has got to be what the frontrunner is saying, that Donald Trump was the victim of a stolen election. Donald Trump should not be charged in the federal courts.
This is the total difficulty that these DeSantis and others are having, is trying to figure out a way to lay a glove on Donald Trump with all these other things going on, with all these prosecutions going on. You can make the case that Donald Trump did a terrible job on COVID. You can make the case that he didn't really look out for the interests of the people when they shut down schools. But it's hard to make that case when all these lawsuits are coming out, all these prosecutions are coming out, and then this is the only thing that you're asked about. Donald Trump, are these prosecutions fair? And what are you going to say? You can't say they are fair because that alienates the Republican base. If you do say that, you're like Mike Pence, you're at the bottom of the polls. So, you know, this is very difficult for any Republican to gain any traction on the stuff that they want to talk about. And what they don't want to talk about is endlessly Donald Trump. But that's what they're forced to talk about, because that's how all of us are talking about. It's either Donald Trump or Taylor Swift.
But can you run a presidential campaign on grievance by just saying, look what they're doing to me? Can you do that all the time? Because independent voters are going to go, enough already.
Well, we'll find out. Yeah, you can run a campaign based on grievance. As a matter of fact, Andrew Jackson ran a campaign on the Krupp bargain way back in the 1820s, and he was able to win overwhelmingly. Yeah, grievance is not a bad way to run. Richard Nixon ran on grievance in 1968. Really, in many ways, Ronald Reagan ran on grievance in 1980. You know, grievance is not a bad way to get motivated voters to come out. They vote on dislike more than like oftentimes.
Are people scared to attack Donald Trump because they realize most of the Republican base are now Trump supporters? Is this something that they should have dealt with 8 years ago when he was running? Because they knew what Donald Trump was like. They knew he lied. They knew he had business failures. They knew he was unreliable.
Well, they tried to make all those attacks in 2016. I mean, what Trump has is a special bond with the Trump voters who make up probably 40 to 45% of the Republican base, which is a really good base to start off from if you want to run for a nomination. And what happened in 2016, we had so many other candidates running against him, not unlike what's going on right now, that it was hard for anyone to get anywhere close to what Trump had. So, yeah, it is very difficult to attack Trump because you're attracting the Trump voter. And what you have to do is try to make the distinction between the Trump voter and their grievances and Donald Trump and his special issues that he's got.
And none of the other candidates are going to step aside for one of the other candidates to become the anti-Trump vote, are they? They're not going to say, we choose you rather than me.
Well, you know, there's a lot of ego involved. And what typically happens in these type of campaigns is people decide not to run when they run out of money. So in many ways, the funders will make a decision, okay, who is the candidate we most want to be the anti-Trump? And we're all going to put our money in that. Right now, you have Ron DeSantis raised a lot of money, Tim Scott's raised a lot of money, Nikki Haley's raised a lot of money. And so they're and Vivek has some money too. So, you know, if you have all these guys still getting access to money, they can still run a campaign. But you're right, ego is a really big thing. And all these people who are voting really believe that they're the best one to solve the problems in the country, and it's going to be hard for them to drop out unless they're forced to.
But you don't win a presidential election on Republican voters alone. You've got to appeal to the middle. Does things like appearing in a federal courthouse accused of conspiracy and obstruction, and this is just one of three places where he's facing these sort of, mean that independents and neutral voters suddenly go, this guy isn't for me, I'm out?
Well, you know, Donald Trump's not the only one with ethical problems. If you look at what's going on with Hunter Biden and Joe Biden and the Biden crime family, as Republicans
Which
like
are
to
all
call
allegations at the moment.
Oh, well, they're a little bit more than allegations. And what we saw,
nothing's been proven.
Nothing's really been, well, okay. There's a lot of smoke in the Biden fire, and they're going to have to make a determination whether they like the Biden family's problems or the Trump's family's problems. No one's coming in with clean hands. And independent voters, if you look at it with the polls, Donald Trump right now is doing better with independent voters than people thought he would be, and the polls are extremely tight. And so this idea that if we vote for Donald Trump, he'll lose again, which is the electability argument that Ron DeSantis and others are trying to make, it's not holding water according to the polls. So we'll see what happens.
Take your Republican hat off for a moment. As an American, do you despair that this is happening, that we're seeing what could be the most important, significant trial in American history being carried out because of the actions of a former president?
Yeah, I look at this atmosphere, and it's kind of a circus. I don't really like politics becoming a circus. I also like elections to be decided not by lawyers but by voters. And I think that there's an effort here to derail the Trump campaign through all these prosecutions. I think that there's efforts to go after Biden on some of these things. I would like the voters to decide, and I don't really want lawyers to decide.
That's a good place to leave it. Thanks very much indeed for joining us live here in Washington, D.C. So Donald Trump is now in the courthouse. We know what the process will be. He knows what the process will be. He's been through this several times. Fingerprinted, gives over his name, his address, his occupation and his social security number. He will then join his legal team in the courthouse. There will be no mugshot for Donald Trump this time round. There are enough pictures in the public domain for him. And then he will appear in court when he'll be asked how he pleads to the 4 charges against him. And we're fully expecting that for him to say, not guilty.
Alan, many thanks for that. And as you heard Alan say there, an important moment for the ex-President Donald Trump. And of course, it's brought both pro-Trump supporters and anti-Trump protesters to the courthouse. Relatively calm, considering what took place on January the 6th, 2021, that insurrection at the Capitol. Of course, Donald Trump accused of overturning the 2020 election results, an act that inspired that assault at the heart of American democracy. Let's bring in Michael Isikoff, who joins us in our studio in Washington, D.C. He's an investigative journalist. A very warm welcome to you. So in many ways, it appears as if there are 2 trials going on here. There's what's going on in the court of public opinion, and there's what eventually is going to play out in a U.S. courthouse. And given that 3 out of 10 Americans still believe that this election was stolen from them, it seems like this will be a real stress test for the American judicial system.
Absolutely. And we could get some pretty early indications today, this afternoon, on how that stress test is going to play out. Trump is obviously going to plead not guilty, but the judge will have to give some indication of how quickly she wants to move on this. And I think one of the first big questions is, does she begin to set a schedule, if not today, then in the next few days, and set a trial date? We already know that Trump is facing one trial that's scheduled for March in New York City. That's on the hush money allegations, and another in southern Florida for the Mar-a-Lago documents case. That's scheduled now for May. We don't know whether those trial dates are going to hold up. But here's a third one. And the judge, a lot of attention will be on how quickly does the judge try to move this. And, is Trump going to have to be in 3 courtrooms while he's running for president next year? So that's the first big thing to look for. The second big thing to look for is, this is a tough judge. And does she set bail conditions that include admonitions to Trump about some of his public comments in which he seems to threaten prosecutors and agents and others involved in these trials? He was just on a podcast the other day in which he talked about it would be very dangerous if he was ever sent to jail. That seemed to be could be interpreted as a threat to people working in the courthouse, to the prosecutors working on the case. The judge could make it clear that she's not going to tolerate that, but that's going to run up against Trump's rights as a political candidate to say whatever he wants about what the Biden administration Justice Department is doing to him.
Well, what do you make of the political theatre around this particular arraignment? Because Donald Trump didn't actually need to be there in person, did he? He could have done all of this over Zoom. What's his strategy there, do you think?
No, I think that the court wanted him there. I don't think there's a option for just zooming in on your court arraignment these days. I think this is something that is required as part of the judicial process. And look, from Trump's perspective, I mean, his poll numbers seem to get better after each one of these indictments and arraignments. So it may be in his political interest to have as much attention to this as he can get.
Do you get the sense that most Americans will want to see how this turns out when it does go to court before they vote in the presidential election? Will it make any difference if it does go to trial before that key date?
Well, that is, one of the big questions that hangs over this. What impact will it have politically? How will the American public process it? It's really, look, our country now is so polarized, is so divided, and opinions about Donald Trump are baked in for, I would say, well over 90% of the electorate. We're talking about a relatively small number of voters who are going to decide the outcome of the next election. And, my sense is, given that, look, we had a New York Times poll the other day that showed even after 2 criminal indictments, Donald Trump is tied with Joe Biden, 43-43. That's astounding. The idea that a twice indicted accused felon could be competitive against the incumbent president of the United States. How's the third one? I think the real key and answer to this is, how does the trial proceed? What is the evidence? And how much of the American public will absorb what the evidence is when it's presented in a courtroom? One problem is this is in federal court. There's no cameras in federal courtrooms, so the public won't get a chance to watch the trial in real time. They won't get a chance to watch it at all. They'll have to rely on news accounts. So that will somewhat diminish the power of the evidence.
Michael, also in previous occasions where Donald Trump has been under an awful lot of legal pressure, he's used these very public events as an opportunity almost to raise funds. It does raise the question, of course, who is paying for all of these court cases? This is surely money he'd rather just plow back into his campaign.
Well, until now, he's been using his political action committee, Save America, to pay his legal bills. And, some of that is really stretching the use of politically donated funds because he was using them not just for defending himself in a case like this, which involves actions while he was president, but he was even using those funds to pay his lawyers in New York cases investigating his personal business expenses, having nothing to do with his role as president. So I think that there was, that clearly was stretching the outer limits of campaign finance law to use his PAC for purposes like that. Now it appears he's going to be setting up a legal defense fund. But look, at the end of the day, Donald Trump has no problem raising money. He's got these fervent supporters out there who appear willing to keep writing checks and sending in the envelope. So I suspect at the end of the day, he may be okay on his legal expenses.
Okay. Michael, many thanks for joining us. Michael Isikoff, who's the chief investigative correspondent at Yahoo News and co-host of Skullduggery podcast.